Good morning, everyone. Happy Sabbath. So I'm going to be reading for you this morning chapter 8 of our book Singers on the Sand. Just a reminder, if you haven't listened to the other chapters, then I strongly suggest that you jump onto YouTube and listen to those ones first. So this is chapter 8. And sitting with me is Pinky. We'll see how she goes. Satu stood beside his friend Hans. Fear paralyzed him. He could not take his eyes from the witch doctor, who clutched the big teacher's arm and moaned as though something had struck him with a spear. The teacher patted Tamer's shoulder and tried to soothe him enough so he could talk. All the people had run out of their huts and stood watching and listening. They could all understand what the red-haired man was trying to say. He kept asking Tamer, "Where is Martyr? Do you know where Martyr is?" Tamer shook his head. It seemed to Satu that all Tamer could do now was shake his head over and over, but at last he spoke in a choked voice. "I didn't see her. I didn't see her. It is the curse, the snake curse." The big teacher didn't understand at first. He still patted Tamer's shoulder and tried to figure out what the witch man had said, but the man's voice was so strangled and full of quavers that even Satu could scarcely make out the words. Finally Satu went to the teacher. He stood right in front of him and told him what Tamer had said. He sounded every word by itself so the red-haired man could understand. "He says he doesn't know where Martyr is, but he thinks something bad has happened to her because of the snake curse." A smile spread over the big teacher's face. "What is this snake curse he talks about?" "It must be some curse he laid against your family," Satu said. "He has powerful spirit charms, you know. He has teeth and skulls of animals and roots and seeds, but his strongest charm is a dried snake." "Oh, that must be what Martyr told us about when she went to Tamer's house the other day," Hans said. She said she blessed the poor snake, remember?" Satu shivered. "She must have picked the snake up. Tamer had already laid the curse on it, I suppose. This is dangerous, you know." He took hold of Hans and shook him a little. "Something bad has surely happened to Martyr. Tamer's curses always work." Satu looked at Tamer. He thought he had never seen anyone's face so miserable. Everyone stood there looking at the witch man. The teacher looked at him too. "I'll be eaten by mosquitoes." The teacher looked at him too, but he still kept his hand on Tamer's shoulder. "Look here, my friend," the big teacher said. "We don't know where Martyr is, but I'm sure she is all right. She must have wandered off somewhere. Now, all you people stand right here where you are. I will ask the God we worship to show you that the snake curse cannot touch those who worship him." Then the red-haired man lifted his eyes and talked to the sky. The words he said were loud and powerful, and the people trembled, although they couldn't understand. When the words were finished, the big teacher smiled and said to Tamer, "Now help us. We must find the child. She cannot have gone far. She has been gone only since we ate breakfast this morning." It was Tamer who found Martyr, and Satu was right behind him. They had pushed into the jungle past the spring, and there they found the little girl with a bunch of wildflowers in her hand. She had stripped them from a jungle vine. When Tamer came toward her, she held both arms out to him and tried to give him the bouquet of blossoms. The witch doctor lifted her in his arms and held her close. Satu walked behind them, and he saw the shaking of Tamer's shoulders and knew the witch man tried to put down his great joy at finding little Martyr unhurt. At the spring they met the whole village, for everyone seemed to have the same idea, that Martyr must have gone into the jungle. Tamer put the child in her father's arms and turned to go back to his hut. The teacher took hold of his arm. "Tamer, you see, the child is unhurt. You are not to grieve or worry any more. No spirit can hurt this little girl." Satu and Hans stood close to the big teacher. They watched Tamer go back to his hut. "You see," the big man said, "he loves little Martyr. He is afraid of his own witch medicine." He looked down at the two boys. "God is pulling on Tamer's heart, you see." It was evening of the next day when someone saw the chief's fishing boat. It was still only a speck on the horizon, but excitement ran through the village like a flame, and all the people flocked to the landing place. They waited for the boat to pull up to the wharf. Hans was there with Satu, and both boys strained for the first view of the teachers of Islam. There were 3 of them, smiling brown men with faces much like the people of the Great Sangha. 2 of them were young, but one, Satu was sure he must be the leader, was older. He wore a red cap on his head, and Satu thought his eyes looked cold, like polished pebbles in the water. All the men acted friendly, every one, and when the chief led them into his own house, the whole village followed, wanted to see what the newcomers would do and say. For one thing, Satu knew already that these men spoke the language of his people easily. He had heard their voices. He had heard the name of the short, stocky man who was their leader. He was called Guru Mullah. The following morning, Chief Meriden sent a messenger to every house in the village, telling them that now he would make a great feast because of the new teachers that had come. It would be a feast of welcome, and the people must all cook and bring their best palm wine and make merry in order to show the new teachers honor and kindness. Because these men had brought wonderful new magic from the southern islands, the feast was set for the 4th day from then. Immediately the whole village seized with excitement. In every house the women began preparation for the feast. Tamer came out of his house and mingled with the village people and acted like his old self again. Only in the house on the sand was there no change and no excitement. There was only beauty in that beautiful house, singing every morning and evening, and a great deal of looking into the black book, and still more talking to the God of heaven. Satu had learned at last that when the big teacher lifted his eyes to the sky or the roof of the house, he was talking to God, who lived far beyond all things that men could see and up behind the stars. Another thing that Satu had learned was that when a teacher opened the holy book and laid it on his knees, he was not talking to the book of magic. He was reading the words from it that had been written there long ago, so long ago that no living man could remember that far back. The evening after the feast was announced, only a few people came to the house on the sand to hear the singing and the words of God. Satu came and a few others, but the rest of the village people were so eager to prepare for the great feast that they had no time for singing or listening. They were so busy that most of them had no time or thought for the fire mountain. The day after the Islam teachers came, Satu went alone to his high perch among the rocks. He sat there for a long time trying to collect his thoughts and to understand what was happening around him in the village. One thing he knew for certain: the battle between the magic of the big teacher and the new teaching of Islam had already begun, and his father, Chief Meriden, was on the side of the Islam teachers. As he sat there and wondered what might happen next, he could not help seeing that now the fire mountain seemed to throw more fire than it had ever before, and the trembling of the ground was more and more thundering in the solid earth rumbled louder than Satu remembered. If the fire spirits had been angry before, they were raging now with fury. The feast was to last 3 days, and most of those 3 days Satu ran back and forth between the village and the house on the sand. In the village all was wild excitement. The people danced and chatted and fought and drank and gorged on the food the woman had prepared. In the teacher's house all was quiet except for the singing. The pig teacher sung all the time these days, and Satu couldn't understand why. Surely he must have seen what the chief had done. He couldn't help know that the fine piece of garden land the chief had given to the new teachers, and Satu was sure he felt sorry because the village people did not come as they used to listen and learn the words of the song and the words of the holy book. Now they were busy feasting. Had they forgotten so soon? Yet, Satu thought, the melodies had never sounded so sweet, and it was a pity too, because there were so few to listen. During the days of the feast, the big teachers went out to fish. Satu could hear them singing even out on the water. "Why does your father sing?" Satu asked Hans on the last day of the feast. "There is no one to hear." Hans looked at him in surprise. "My father doesn't sing to people, he sings to God." "Why?" It was Satu's turn to be astonished. "Well, it's like this. He knows how good and great and strong God is and all the wonderful things God will do. So he sings his thanks to God for all these things. And do you think your God listens? Of course he listens. It makes him glad to hear my Father sing. Wait, you will see what God will do. After the feast, some people were sick. It was a common thing after a feast for people to become sick. Satu didn't know why, but Hans said it might be because they ate too much or drank too much palm wine because the food wasn't clean. Satu wondered about this. He'd always thought that evil spirits made people sick. He could never figure out why. Just after a big feast, when the people had sacrificed to the spirits and praised and honoured them, the ungrateful spirit should turn right around and make so many people sick. Perhaps Hans was right. Satu began to wonder whether the evil spirits were as powerful as he had thought. Whatever stomach aches the people of Sangha had, they did not trouble the big teacher with them. They flocked to Tamer for his witch medicine. During the next few weeks, there was great activity on the hill behind the teacher's house, for the village, where men were putting up a fine house for the Islam teachers. They brought poles and timbers from the jungle, and the woman wove mats and thatch for the chief's command. They did not stop with building one house, they built 3, and all of them were bigger and better than the teacher's house on the stand. But none of them were so neat, and none of them had a garden of bright flowers hugging its walls. None of them had a little girl like Martyr or a boy like Hans. So Satu chose to go more and more to the teacher's house. It was harder for him to go now because his father scolded him and threatened to punish him if he went. But still he went. The leader of the Islam teachers, Guru Mullah, persuaded the chief to build a house for worship. Only the men could go to worship in the house. No women were allowed. The whole thing was mysterious to Satu, and there was no singing. He could not understand why his father would be so strong for this kind of magic. However, just as Gola had said, many of the village people listened to the new magic. Also, some came back to the teacher's house to worship after the first excitement had passed. By the time the rainy season began, the village had been divided into 2 parts. The greater part of the people followed the new teaching of Islam, and a smaller group of about 30 persons chose to follow the big teacher. Among these was Satu. Even though his father often slapped him and Guru Mullah scolded and they urged him to attend Islam worship, the boy steadfastly refused, and now the ties of faith and friendship grew. Friendship drew him even closer to the teacher's family than before. This was true of all the little flock of the village people who worshipped the house on the sand. It was thought a great hand enfolded them and squeezed them together until there was one heart and one mind. Now their minds opened to the teaching, and they quickly learned the songs. Little by little they began to look different from the other people of the village. Their faces shone with a kind of brightness, their bodies were cleaner and stronger, their hats were neater, and most different of all, they went about their work singing the songs the teacher taught them. They understood now that God rejoiced to hear their songs, because when he listened to their sweet songs of praise, he knew that they trusted him for everything. I suppose the Islam teachers are quite happy now, Hans said as he loitered with Satu on the beach. Oh, I wouldn't say that, Satu said. Gola is grinning all the time. Maybe he is happy. My father, the chief, is unhappy because the big teacher is not going to leave the Sangha. And of course he is angry with people who keep worshipping here in your house. Tamer is always sad. I never saw him so sour-faced. You remember what my father said about Tamer the day Martyr was lost? Hans asked his friend. Do you remember how he said that God was pulling on Tamer's heart? Why would that make Tamer so miserable? If someone is pulling on you and you resist it and fight with it, you may not be happy either. You may even hurt. Yes, I suppose so, Satu agreed. Another thing Tamer promised the people, that if they accept the Islam teachers, the fire spirit would be comforted and they would lie down and rest and not make all the noise and fire and shaking. Both boys looked at the volcano. It looks to me as if the fire mountain is spouting out more flames than ever, Hans said. Yes, no one has seen a bird over there since the Islam teachers came. Everyone is worried. Now they say that they only wait for the the only way to quiet the spirit is to chase your family away. Of course, you know it isn't the spirits that make the fire, Hans said. There are volcanoes in other lands. My father says that there are fires deep in the earth. My father has called a council for this evening, Satu said. They will decide what to do. They are so worried about the fire mountain that they will surely do something. Satu laid his hands on Hans' arms. Whatever I hear, I will tell you. Don't worry. I know that God is strong. He will take care of us.